Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you very much for coming out on this very hot, muggy day. I really appreciate it. Welcome. My name is Jake Scott. I am the Secretary for the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte very shortly to run us through the evening, but before that I just want to make sure we're all aware of the format. Those of you that have been at an event before will know this is the way we normally do things. But before I do that, just to let you know in terms of who we are. So the Institute for the Impact of Faith in Life is a research forum. We look at the role that faith plays in our daily life from a faith perspective and looking at how that influences our approaches to different aspects of life, whether that's at work, at home or the community. Tonight the plan is to go through the findings of the report, which Charlotte will talk about, and you should all have a copy on your seats. The report is into the relationship between faith and sustainability and environmentalism, looking at how attitudes are structured by faith and if that translates to action, and if so, how. Then there will be a short discussion with our panellists, which will take roughly about 20 to 25 minutes. Then Charlotte will open up to a Q&A from the audience, so if you have any questions, please hold to the end. And then after that, around about 8:30, we'll go to reception with refreshments and canapes. There is kosher and halal refreshments available for those of us that observe, and there are alcoholic and non-alcoholic options. If anyone has any questions about the format of the evening, I'm happy to answer now, but if not, I'll hand over to Charlotte. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jake. So it's been a real privilege getting to work on this piece of research. We have a working relationship with Whitestone Insight, which is part of the British Polling Society, who run regular national surveys for us. And this was a particularly interesting one, getting to look at the intersect of faith and environmentalism. So they surveyed 2,064 UK adults across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And we really wanted to look into how does one's faith instruct them around the environment and the well-being and keeping of the environment? Does a high belief that God demands that you look after the planet translate to environmental action? And does high faith regard for environmentalism plus action then translate to voting around environmentalist policies? I think it's really interesting as we've seen how faith groups are compelled to vote in certain directions according to concerns politically. Well, when faith, we found, is considered to be across the board instructing of care of the planet, it doesn't necessarily look like, with our results here, that then translates into voting. So I think, one of the key things, seeing this consistency across the faith groups, that God asks for them to care for the planet, but this isn't necessarily translating into action, isn't necessarily translating into voting. Is there an opportunity for faith leaders and community leaders to actually work with their congregations, their communities, to compel greater care, greater environmentalism? As we've seen, there is a lot of care for politics abroad and conflict abroad. Can the same be done around environmentalism, which would be incredibly important for everyone and the well-being of all on this planet? So I think I just do want to share with you some of the standout findings before I'm going to ask some questions related to the findings, because they are curious. So we found across the board, this one was quite predictable, I think, that Hindus led in all indicators of environmental action. So 64% of Hindu respondents have rewilded compared to 13%. Now we use the word exclusivist, that meant those that believe their faith is the one true faith. So compared with 31% of exclusivist Muslims and 22% of exclusivist Christians, they led on consumer habits, on donating to charities, on joining environmental groups, and then voting with environmentalism in mind. They were closely followed by Muslim communities, but then falling far behind were Christian respondents. So the Christian exclusivists were the most likely to deny climate change, with 31% agreeing with the statement that they don't believe that global climate change is happening, contrasting to just 17% of Muslim respondents. They're also least likely to recognise the harms or take any environmental action. Hope, though, moving to hope, the youth were most likely to agree that God is an environmentalist. And we've seen with previous research that you might have seen it's come out recently. We were on the BBC yesterday discussing findings that show that there's a big revival amongst youth with faithfulness. So youth are most likely to believe that their God is the only God. Their God is the only God, and they're most likely to believe that God is in control of the environment. However, they're also most likely to believe that God is an environmentalist and most concerned and most engaged in environmental action. So there's hope in that, whilst having quite a dismal response from the Christian respondents. But we do find this really curious because the Christian respondents were also very high on believing that God instructs them to look after the planet. So this disjunct was very curious, and we are hoping with our esteemed panellists. So Natasha Chawla here is doing her PhD at the University of Oxford, working on ontopoetics and environmental philosophy. And she does have a research interest in religions and environmentalism. And we've already had a bit of a discussion. She has some really interesting insights on this very question about disjunct. And then Raj Koshin, who is a member of the Dawoodi Bohra community, which I'm already aware of is doing great things around environmentalism as a part of Project Rise. So I'd love to hear more about that. And we're going to be asking you a bit about the Muslim results as well. So I think I'd like to first have some questions that I want to put to you, and then we've got 2 questions that I have to put to you, and then we can open up. But I do want to put to you, Natasha, why do you think there is this disjunct in which Christians have a high sense that God asked them to take care of the planet, but low action? Hindus actually didn't necessarily have a high sense that they were instructed to look after the planet, but they had high action. And then Muslims had high belief, high action, high voting. They were quite consistent. What do you think about that?
So from a Hindu point of view, and when I say Hindu point of view, there are many schools of thought in Hinduism. So there's not one point of view. This is from what I see. So from a Hindu point of view, God isn't really separate. There's no God sitting up there saying, do this, do that. There's no 10 commandments as such. There's a concept called dharma, and there's a concept called karma. And every karma is the law of cause and effect. Every action has a reaction, right? And we can't run away from it. So if we do something, it's going to have a reaction, right? And so this piles up, piles up, piles up. And if our constant action is against the environment, that's going to build up and cause something. So it's not to say that God is saying I'm going to punish you. It's very much in our hands. It's our responsibility. This law of karma, and then the law of dharma. Dharma is to do the right thing. Dharma. There's lots of definitions for dharma, but it means righteousness. It means what sustains a thing, what upholds it, what the essence of a thing is, right? So for an example of this is the dharma of sugar is sweet. Why is that? Because it's sweet for everybody, whether you like sugar or not, right? It's sweet. And no matter how much sugar you eat, it will be sweet. So the very thing of sugar is sweetness. So this thing called dharma, it's the essence of the thing. The essence of human beings is to be righteous, is to be good, is to do the things that unifies, to uplift, to sustain, to make life progress. So when you've got dharma and karma acting together, it's not someone of a higher authority telling you do this, do that. That's the very way of life that a Hindu would subscribe to. So I think that's where it's not so much the text is saying it, but that's the belief system in itself, the way of life, the way of living.
Do you think maybe the reason why the Hindu community's responses in here, obviously it was just a few that were asked, so these respondents, why they had a lower sense that they were instructed to do something around caring for the planet, is that to do with, as you said, there not being doctrine then, there not being instruction? Do you think there was a reaction to the word instruct?
Perhaps, because the instruction it's not an instruction from God. The law of karma is, well, whatever you do, there'll be a reaction to that, right? And so when you have the idea of reincarnation, maybe you won't feel it in this life, but in the next life or in another life, you will feel it. And so it's not, there's a heaven or a hell, but in this life, what we're doing is causing that kind of heaven or hell. So your actions can cause a really beautiful place, as we've seen, there's so many beautiful places in the world, or a hellish place in the world.
And so what element do you think of the belief system is feeding into the high action, environmental action that we're seeing from the Hindu communities?
It's exactly that. It's what I do has an effect, and if I don't feel it now, I'll feel it later. And it's not just an effect on me; it's an effect on future generations. And you see, that's.
Does environmentalism come into the teachings?
Well, okay. So there's a quote from, and I shared this with you earlier, but it's a beautiful quote, and this is from a text that's taught to children. So it's very rudimentary. Ether, air, fire, water, earth, planets, all creatures, directions, trees and planets, rivers and seas, they are all organs of God's body. Remembering this, a devotee respects all species. So there's no separation. I mean, there is a separation in terms of, okay, human beings have a certain intellect, we have the capacity to make rational decisions, we have the capacity to do things and see, okay, look, if I do that, that's not, whereas an animal is more instinctive. So there is a difference, but we're all part of that one ecosystem. So in that way, we have agency, we have free will, but we're part of it. We're not different from the earth and the trees, and it's a web of connection.
So that connectedness there is there in the Hindu belief systems, which could be leading why there is the action and the voting. And then, so, Coach Chan, Chohan, sorry.
Cochin.
Cochin?
That's right.
Yeah. We had the result that 31% of the Muslim respondents believe global climate is changing. However, they believe it's not primarily caused by human activity. What are your thoughts on that?
This was quite interesting. How I can address this is a report indicating that 31% of Muslims believe in global climate change but do not attribute it primarily to human activity. Highlights the significant perspective within the community. This view aligns with the broader trends seen in our various demographics, where there's acknowledgement of climate change but differing opinions on its primary causes. It's very similar to what you've said, but the perspective could be influenced by several factors, including varying levels of access to scientific information, religious and cultural beliefs, and differing interpretations of environmental stewardship. Understanding these nuances is crucial for developing effective communication and policy strategies that engage within our community. Addressing climate change requires a multifaceted approach that considers these diverse viewpoints. And one of the things where it all comes into our community, which is the Dawoodi Bohra community, is a directive from our spiritual leader, Sayyidina Muqaddam Saifuddin, which basically asks us to look at the current issues with the planet, with the problems we are having with the climates at the moment, and working towards helping and resolving in any which way we can. So it's all God Almighty, Allah Ta'ala, created the world, created nature, and it's our responsibility as human beings to preserve life on the planet, nature, animals, etc. So our responsibility, it lies with us, within our responsibility, and we have to find ways of maintaining that. And that's our focus as Dawoodi Bohras. Again, like you said, there's many different factions within Muslims. So some people will do certain things better than other groups. Education plays part in there. Demographics, things like that. So that's how I see the results.
I think this is a really useful kind of moment to move into what is Project Rise and the work that you're doing, and how do you feel your faith instructs or links to the work that's being done with Project Rise?
Project Rise is an organisation set up within our community, the Dawoodi Bohras, and it's a directive we have. Each community, wherever they reside in the world, have been given projects to work with. So you find environmental issues within your area and you help support them. So like in Bradford, I'll take Bradford as an example. We have a lot of river cleanups, litter picking, tree plantations, things of that nature. So we work towards that. That's our aim and our goal. So we try and work with the local council, local trusts in working and helping support these. In other areas of the world, there's ocean cleanups, microfiber plastics that are big pollutant. So our community will go on the beaches, clean the plastics, collect plastics, etc. It's so vast. I mean, you know, you make a small contribution, but in India, they are focusing on water irrigation. So the community will go, help dig, provide financial support, and all sorts of things of that nature to help set up the infrastructure. So that whatever, anything to do with the climate, environmentalism, whatever we can contribute, that becomes a project.
Is that founded in an element of scripture?
Well, there's a quote by the Prophet Muhammad, Hubbul Watan Minal Iman, which means basically wherever you reside, whichever country you reside in, you follow the guidelines of that country and support and contribute towards it. So that is one facet. So environmental, climate change, etc. is a big issue in all countries at the moment. So we're focused on the environmental side as Project Rise, and that's what we're working on, or working towards.
It's really inspirational, and I wonder if you had any thoughts or comments on how potentially other faith groups and faith leaders considering scripturally or culturally, perhaps for the Hindu and Dharmic belief systems, there's a real inclination to stewardship for the planet. So how maybe could faith leaders learn from your community to inspire the doctrine to translate into action?
Well, in Bradford, again, we are very closely linked to all faith communities. We have a good relationship with the Hindu community, and we share ideas. We go to each other's events, and again, we work with other faith groups, Sikh, Jewish, Christian groups. So we do share ideas. We do project ourselves in a positive, or try and project ourselves in a positive manner by saying we're working on these projects, etc. So the media play a big part. If they pick out that such and such community, the Muslim community is planting so many trees, cleaning so many rivers and reservoirs, then it can encourage other communities and other groups to say, well, they're doing this, why aren't we doing it? Yeah. So that's how I feel, and I think it works quite well in Bradford, because we do see events happening by other communities, and we think, well, we should be doing that as well.
Leading by example.
Yeah, so it works.
That's very positive news. So I have a question here that's been given to me to ask. So we have, this is for you, Natasha. 80% of Hindus were convinced that the climate is changing, higher than both the average amongst those of faith and the national average, which was just 77%. So why do you think for Hindus the conviction that there is a global climate crisis is so high compared to others?
Why is the conviction that the climate crisis is happening?
Yeah. It seems a strange question considering it is happening. But
Well,
we had to ask the question and
Yeah.
people come with low responses.
So I guess in India, I can kind of see it there. I don't know about this country, but in India, the climates are so different, and you really see the temperature rise. So when Delhi is hot, anyway it was hot, but now it's ridiculous. People are dying from that heat, so they can see, and the floods are getting so much worse, and it's a real effect on people's lives. Like, I mean, for here in Britain, I can talk from Oxford. Last summer, it was really, really hot, if you remember. The libraries were full, even though the students were less in summer. Why? Because the libraries are the only places with air conditioning. Mm-hmm. Everyone was in the library, right? So you can see it. But there you can, it affects people on such a different level. In terms of flooding, in terms of when the heat goes out, it's very much, you you can see it. People's businesses are being taken away, their homes, and so I feel like it's more tangible.
That is fascinating, because maybe that does feed into why we see greater action, proactivity from the Muslim and Hindu respondents who have families back in Pakistan and India who are suffering. And we see in the news about heat and flooding, and every year we see people dying at Hajj, and that's been in the news again recently. So maybe there is that sense of real danger that is not being felt maybe across Christian respondents.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think for me that they were the questions that I was interested to ask, so I'm going to give the audience an opportunity to put forward any questions.
I was interested in the exclusivist Christian response there. Mm-hmm. They're the highest sort of deniers.
They are.
I mean, traditionally, there's been, on the evangelical wing of Christianity, a sense of using the earth, you know, the chosen people, the elect, can profit from the earth, can subdue the earth, can dominate the earth. And, you know, all the people who believe in the rapture, all these types of things, they want to bring it on. They want the end times to come. So I just wondered if that plays into any of your findings, that some people have this perverse view.
That, in a sense, that came in with, but you can't say that it was let's bring it on, but there was a high agreement with the statement that the world will be renewed at one point, so there is no need to worry. But also that didn't quite tally up with the fact that they were still concerned. They weren't the most concerned, but they were still concerned. So I got the impression from the results that there was something else influencing the more conservative Christian communities, and that may be political and cultural, and whether there is a link between conservative Christianity and conservative politics. And climate denial typically is found within the right, the conservatives, and less within the left. And the relationship between the Hindu communities and Muslim communities more with Labour and the left, and the unlikelihood therefore of being in an echo chamber in which climate denial would be present. So did wonder if there was a political impact. We simply couldn't go into that, so we could only suppose different reasons why we saw these results. But I think the fact that we had all three faiths consistently saying that God tells them to care for the planet, but then all three faiths consistently behaved in different ways, suggests it's not doctrine, it's something else that's affecting the communities, and that could be social, economic, political.
I have a question if no one else. So obviously with the research we found that younger respondents were more likely to engage in actions and activities. From your own experiences, obviously with Project Rise and in the research that you do, is this something that you've seen happening as well, that there are a lot of younger people involved?
Yeah, we have found that with the Project Rise, we are encouraging the youngsters to come into the frame and help volunteer and be part of the project. And what we're doing is we're empowering them to find projects within the area. So then they'll come to us and say, right, can we do this? Can we do that? And then we'll ask them to get a team of people. So we get 30 to 40 people every couple of months. And we open it up to everybody within the community. So we do get elder people, professionals, anybody and everybody really joining us. So it does work. Our community in Bradford is 200. So if we get 40 to 50 people, that's 25 to 30% of the community who will turn up on our events. So it does work. And people are getting focused on the issues. So it's all about education, really. You have to really hammer it in. So yeah, thank you.
Natasha, you have something on youth, do you think?
So what I've seen is it's the youth that are really anxious about it. The older population seems more agnostic about it. and almost it's like, but we did all this for you kind of attitude. It's like, we didn't do anything wrong. And it's this from the Industrial Revolution onwards, and how industry and how our lives have developed. It's not, the whole crisis has really been talked about since the 1950s, 1960s. 1960s, it was really like people were talking about it, but it was ignored, and it's been ignored and ignored and ignored. And it's only now, maybe in the past 30 years, that we've got Earth Day, we've got all of these things going on. And the older generation have not been able to do anything about it. And it's almost like we were just doing what we thought was the right thing to do. So why are you blaming us almost? And it's the youth that are getting anxious, and climate grief, all of these new psychological issues are happening. And there's some of the youth are really active about it, and some youth are just really depressed about it. What can we do? It's such a big issue. And that's what I'm seeing, that there's this, it feels so big that people don't know what to do.
We're also seeing across our research elsewhere a revival in faith amongst the youth, and youth being more believing. Faith has more impact of their life. Faith shapes their moral values more. They're more searching for God than the older generations by a large margin. Is that something you're both seeing in your community as well? More young people coming to faith?
It's a difficult question, that. But we encourage the youngsters, the middle-aged people to get the education that is required to learn about the religion, because certainly in our time, we were just going to the mosque to recite the Quran. Mm-hmm. But our children have been given the opportunity within our own mosques, where we've got classes for children, so they get the education. So when they're from 5-6 year old up to 15 to a 16-year-old, they get the education that we feel they need, and in that, all the life experiences are integrated into the courses. So environmentalism, growing up, etc. All that comes into it. So we do focus on that. It's hard, it's difficult to engage everybody in there, but we do aim to work towards that. And
do you feel there's more engagement from sort of 18 to 24-year-olds than you previously experienced?
Well, it's hard work.
Okay, so maybe you don't feel that.
No, I think it's hard work. Yeah. That age range is difficult, because the professionals, they're studying at university, new examples, new life. But we do try and focus, give them an insight into where they should be leading their lives.
Have you seen any what would appear to be an increase in young people coming to faith?
Because of the environment?
Not because of the environment, just generally, because it does then feed into the fact that they then believe God is an environmentalist, that they should do something about the planet. There's also a sense, as you've just said, there's this sense amongst young people of a crisis, and I'm wondering if that feeds into them also moving into faith. We spoke to some young people and they said there's a sense of absolute truth and confidence that having an absolute truth gives them in a world that is complex and unstable. And we had one person actually also talk about there being faith available online to learn about, and freedom of choice coming into faith rather than being brought up in faith is creating a more zealous nature towards faith, and found all this very interesting. And then it links very well to them also seeing God as wanting them to care for the world and environmentalists, and then being more active in environmentalism. So I just wondered if you were seeing that in any way.
I'm not sure I'm seeing more youth go to faith in that respect. I feel like people are asking questions and getting answers that they haven't had before, because it's not being indoctrinated on them, it's being explained to them. And because now faiths are almost opening up much more, like you can get answers from different faiths. And so it feels to me like people are becoming more spiritual rather than religious, going into a particular faith, but rather finding answers from different faiths.
That's actually a very that's a very good way to put it, because that's what the results showed. It was a spiritual conviction that we were seeing amongst the young people compared to the older. They were all saying they were of faith. This was in the faith category, but the young people their faith had more impact, and they were more searching, and they were more connected to those that ticked their of faith but are in the older category. So I think that's exactly what is, and it's what the young people said. The freedom to move into it has caused him to take it on with more seriousness.